40,000 subscribers. For most channels, nothing too special beyond a nice big even number. Certainly a positive in a big number of people, but nothing inherently neat or interesting about it. It's not even a milestone like 50k or anything like that. But for a Warhammer channel, that is the prime funny number. The big ticket number to become the Warhammer 40,000, and I finally reached it thanks to all of your support. Among other tired jokes, it's also the amount of money people spend on their armies and how long they spend painting them. And of course, for me personally, it's the amount of time I spend drooling over pictures of Karl Franz, Prince and Emperor, Elector Count of Reichland, and best Emperor in all of Warhammer. But now is not the time for fantasy. Now is the time for 40k, several thousand subs after I reach the number, because my timing skills are impeccable as always. I debated making this do or don't 40k, but my first video was somewhat along that vein, and also I just don't want to do another one of those yet because the next one will probably be a do or don't for Age of Sigmar. Incidentally, I hope you like goats. So for my 40k special, I thought I'd deliver the hottest take I could make, which probably isn't that hot, but whatever. Allow me to tell you, I think it would be best for the setting if the Imperium of Man finally collapsed and humanity truly fractured. Now before I go on, I don't hate the Imperium. It's awesome. I'm only saying this because I noticed I've complained about Space Marines and the Imperium winning all the time a lot in my last few videos, so I felt like I should make it clear. The Imperium is a wonderful creation, from its military to the Gothic architecture to the way it worships a dead god who explicitly told everyone he wasn't a god. It's all wonderfully grim and dark in the way 40k should be. I mean, look at this. Look at this. How could you not think this slaps? However, the Imperium is kinda dying. Really badly. Countless defeats, nothing but slowly losing territory to rebellion, xenos, and chaos, things that generally are not conducive to an empire surviving very long. I mean, Games Workshop tells us this all the time. These are the darkest times to be a man, galaxy very dangerous, yada yada yada. The thing is, that's what they tell us. That the idea is that the Imperium is on its last leg and is gonna finally fall any day now. But boy, it sure seems to be taking its time with the falling, isn't it? GW tells us the Imperium is a dying empire, but it never really shows in the grand scheme of things. Kaivis Kane mentions offhandedly how there's never enough soldiers to go around, but that came off more as him complaining about having to actually do his job than anything else, which, fair. I too understand having a stressful job of talking about things that I like. In practice, the Imperium usually wins because of the baseline humans of the setting. At least on a whole, I'm aware the Space Marines are anything but baseline humans. Therefore, they have protagonist rights to never ever lose, even if it makes sense for them to do so. Like how in every poorly made fantasy setting, elves and dwarves are objectively better than humans at almost everything, but humans win because the people reading are most likely human. But it's been about 40 years of the Imperium not falling in real life time, and 10,000 years of it not falling in Warhammer time. Or potentially even longer, because with the Great Rift, Games Workshop said screw it and stopped having everyone use the same calendar. And I think it's about time that dying empire got upgraded to dead empire. But what should kill it, you might ask? Chaos? Tyranids? The orcs? The elves finally not being punching bags despite having their very gods participate regularly on the battlefield? The answer here is yes, all of them, but also none of them and something else at the same time. I don't need to explain myself to you, but I will anyway in the name of getting more views and forever pushing off getting a real job. The Imperium's government is quite awful. Calling it inefficient, wasteful, and a huge mess would be like saying Scientology is a little bit like a cult. Because I refuse to read any Warhammer novels besides Caiaphas Cain or Gotrek and Felix, the Valhallan 597th is a regiment that regularly receives more than enough shipments of arms, armor, and manpower. This isn't because the Imperium is prospering and keeps up to date on its troops. It's because the Imperium never bothered to realize that the 597th is actually two regiments that combined into one when Tyranids ate half of each. Beyond that, entire planets can starve or be destroyed because the paperwork to send shipments or declare that they aren't actually heretical shit pits got lost in galactic levels of red tape. The military is all over the damn place. To its credit, the Guard honestly performs fine by itself. They go in, get the job done, and then go to wherever else they're needed. It's the Space Marines that are the issue for the Imperium. Now, what's coming up next isn't actually a complaint. It's honestly a really interesting thing in the lore. But a lot of the Space Marine chapters are more or less independent empires from the Imperium as a whole. They have their own traditions, heraldry, and quite frankly usually ignore whatever actually needs to be done for the Imperium and focus on their chapter's own interests. Here's looking at you, Dark Angels. In fact, one thing I read straight up says that the Imperium is giving more and more planets over to the Space Marines to control directly, which is not something that usually happens in a government strong enough to handle the matter itself. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the source despite looking into it, and quite frankly, I don't remember if it was the intro to a book, a line of dialogue, or the entire premise of a novel I read in a summary. So you'll have to accept the citation of dude trust me on this one. Beyond bureaucratic garbage that only interests people who unironically think Attack of the Clones was a good movie, the Imperium is overextending itself. Much like me when I try to reach something on a high shelf. Thank you my mother for being 5'1", and damn you my father for being 6'6" and not giving me those genes. You ever notice how each of the enemies of the Imperium individually could probably be handled? Like how there aren't enough Dark Eldar to meaningfully attack the Imperium on their own, or the orcs are too disorganized on their own to completely destroy mankind? Tragically for mankind, all of these threats exist simultaneously, and fully dealing with one would mean the others would capitalize on it. Doesn't matter if you blow up a tomb world if the Tyranids vor the planets you had to leave defenseless. Mankind Mankind faces overwhelming odds, inefficient government, and generally just kind of has the cards stacked against it. It's high time for the Imperium to finally fall. And bring humanity with it, right? Get rid of the Marines and Imperial Guard and all of them, surely. No, you fool, all those armies would be fine. Why would they go anywhere? See, I think there's a problem with people saying destroy the Imperium. Usually, at least from what I've seen when it's brought up, it's equated with mankind going the way of Warhammer Fantasy and being destroyed by chaos, or the Tyranids devouring everyone, or some other complete extinction deal. But that's not what would or should happen in this scenario. The Imperium should fall, sure, but mankind shouldn't and wouldn't go down with it. Here's what I think is the best direction for 40k to go in with regards to the Imperium. Maybe you agree, maybe you think I'm cracked in the head, but here goes. The scenario I'm picturing would go as thus. As the Imperium is going on as it has been, that is to say barely holding on, something triggers catastrophic and widespread revolt. Maybe word about chaos gets out at large, since the Imperium tries to keep that information away from the average person. Maybe people realize how widespread certain threats like the Tyranids and Orcs really are. Or maybe it's something simpler, like the Imperium taxing its citizens even more than normal to help fight all these threats until it reaches a breaking point. Kind of a boring way for all of this to happen, but hey, it worked for George Washington, didn't it? Either way, mankind fractures. Instead of the Imperium being a somewhat unified whole, now dozens if not hundreds of successor states are cropping up throughout the galaxy. Some claim to be the Imperium's true successors, some are happy to be entirely separate entities, and hell, the one that still holds Terra could rightfully call itself the Imperium of Man proper, so you can keep all the old iconography and stuff. At the end of the day, what matters is that the cat's out of the bag and now mankind is truly divided. The benefits of the Imperium falling are several-fold. That's how you know I'm serious. I'm breaking out words like several-fold. First off, an easy one is that it will give some actual narrative backing behind Imperium armies fighting each other on the tabletop. Sometimes you see someone playing a game of Guard versus Marines and you go, wait a minute, that ain't right. It doesn't really make sense for the armies of mankind to be at each other's throats like this when they're supposed to be united. And yes, I know it's 40k and common sense is in shorter supply than pretty much anything else, but if the Imperium fractures into numerous squabbling empires, then you don't need to just resort to it's 40k so it's just like that as an explanation. You can have actual meaningful reasons for human armies to fight each other. It could be them fighting for resources or because of significant ideological reasons that wouldn't be delved into with any level of detail, with the Imperium being a technically united entity. It's even more noticeable when it's Marines versus Marines. You see Dark Angels and Blood Angels fighting on the tabletop and it's like, why? Is it who gets the right to use the word angel in their name? There are literal demons from hell in the star system next over. You do have better things to be doing right now. But when the Imperium is no more, all bets are off. Hell, you don't even need a reason to fight if the Imperium's fractured. Everyone belongs to different empires. Gotta fight the other guy because he's the other guy. Now that's a good 40k reason. It could bring some diversity into the Imperium as well. And I don't just mean a new guard model or two. Entirely differing heraldries and beliefs mean that differing appearance and motivations for fighting would crop up and the lore could reflect this. For a good example, look at fantasy. The Empire, Bretonia, and Cathay are all human empires, but they have radically different, well, pretty much everything. You can immediately tell who's who, be it the pike and shot formations of the Empire, the majestic jade warriors marching under the shadow of animated statues, or how you reflexively vomit whenever you look at a Bretonian knight. That's what the Imperium fracturing could bring to 40k. With no more Imperium to hold it back, humanity can truly flourish into a variety of different cultures that feel truly different instead of what we currently have. Sure, Katakan and Cadian soldiers act differently and perform their own roles in combat, but at the end of the day, it's the same overall shtick for each of them: kill and die for the Emperor. Now imagine in this scenario, there could be multiple differing human empires fighting over different interpretations of what the Emperor really is. Or you know what? Screw that. Have a fight between a side loyal to the Emperor and a side fighting in the name of an entirely different religious system. The Catholic space YouTube bad word guys fighting the Shinto space samurai. You could have some sectors ruled over by inquisitors turned kings in their own right, and other sectors devoted to literally any of the dozens of governmental systems we've come up with in history. And of course, this could very well be the perfect way for more models, and not even just for normal human armies based on the Guard. Imagine what the Mechanicus would get up to the moment there's no longer an Imperium telling them what not to do. The amount of tech heresy they would commit immediately would be frightening, and this could lead to all sorts of crazy new units and models to field. Or at the very least, we just get a few new models for the Guard themed around something other than Starship Troopers. Speaking of the Mechanicus, they could get a much more prominent role. They could go from being only technically subservient to, but certainly no more than equal to the other Imperial powers, to being the strongest human faction by far. After all, it doesn't matter if you hate them and what they stand for when they're the only people who can make the guns and ammo you need to not get drowned in orcs. They can be the arms dealers to every empire, funding proxy wars to keep themselves ahead of everyone else and becoming something greater than what they were within the Imperium. Of course, on the flip side, with no more overseeing Imperium to help the cogboys find out when some upstart decides to do some sciencing without consulting the tech priest first, maybe individual planets can achieve a level of technology far in advance of what the overall Mechanicus would have allowed otherwise. As for the Space Marines, there's all sorts of things you can do with them. Guilliman and Ultramar can finally become a fully fledged Byzantine Empire in space, with the 500 worlds becoming the strongest successor. All of the chapters can form their own empires, some allying with each other other, and others becoming hated enemies now that the grudges they've always held are no longer kept in check. Someone can finally just wipe out the Space Wolves now that no one's gonna come to their aid. Maybe some chapters will outright ally with the Eldar, Tau, and other miscellaneous Xeno species. Some chapters might straight up go back to being legions. With no more Imperial decrees to keep them separate, the Dark Angels and Imperial Fists would almost certainly go back to being one massive unified army. So the scale of 40k battles wouldn't even need to shrink here just because the Imperium shattered like stained glass. Of course, the biggest upside with the Imperium dividing is that all of the threats in the galaxy will become, you know, actually threatening. The best example here is the Tau. Now, I like the Tau. They're cool. Them being the rising empire to the Imperium's failing one and the Eldar's dead one is interesting. The problem is that as things stand, there's no way in hell they can meaningfully take anything on. They're ants compared to all the other major factions in the galaxy. Like how one time the Tau went to a hive world and saw that it had more humans on it than the Tau had, well, Tau than in all of their space. As it stands, they're in a position to have a moderately impactful last stand at best. But then you take that unified Imperium and crush it into tiny pieces, yes, I'm reusing Carillion, leave me be, and suddenly there's no massive empire for those planets that border the Tau to call for aid to. There's just a bunch of squabbling states who have as much to gain from your demise as they do from your continued existence. All of a sudden, the Tau go from something that, let's be honest with ourselves, is barely worth worrying about to the next superpower in the galaxy, because every planet they take only makes that snowball roll faster. They don't even need to conquer like everyone else. They just gotta roll up and say, hey, that awful empire that oppressed and abused you before we came in, we're better in every way. Here's proof. Why not join us? Whether or not the Tau are actually super oppressive in their own way is meaningless. Their diplomacy worked on planets before the Imperium cracked apart, and it would certainly work after the fact. Of course, this isn't just my love letter to the Tau. The Orcs would gain a massive level in their threat because when humanity is almost as disunified as them, it's just leveling the playing field. It doesn't matter, the best they can do is run straight into your gun line when you suddenly lose the unlimited supply of manpower that you had backing up. They're gonna win eventually. Same for the Tyranids. They might finally win a single battle if the Imperium broke apart. Probably just some no-name Space Marine chapters and a few backwater planets, but hey, at this point a win's a win for the Tyranids. Chaos can finally get a win that doesn't turn into a loss, like when splitting half the galaxy in half with ghost storms just let the Emperor set Nurgle's house on fire before he pissed it out. I know Chaos winning makes me unhappy, but even I gotta admit they've been on the losing front for just a bit too long. Now Abaddon doesn't need to carve his way through the beast that is the Imperium, just countless lesser states far less capable of opposing him. The least interesting development to come out of this will be whatever the Necrons do, because they seem fine as is, but if nothing else, they get scarier too, and that's a good thing. And that's probably just me being unimaginative. I bet there's loads of things you could do with them I'm just not thinking of, like certain human civilizations allying with them. See, there's something. And my precious space elves, the craft worlds can finally do meaningful things again because humanity no longer has the entire galaxy to throw at them when they try to do something important. Sweet lord, would this be glorious to behold. No repeat of the Death Watch ruining Iniad for everyone because there's no power structure for them to work with. And the Dark Elder would go from nuisance to major threat. Against the Imperium at large, same as the Tau, they're barely worth the trouble to deal with. They can kidnap a whole planet at once, big deal, there's a trillion more to spare. But that means a lot more when there's no empire with a trillion planets. Who knows, if the Imperium as a whole is out of the picture, the Eldar might be able to resurface as a proper empire once more. Certainly nowhere near what it was, but who's to say that without the bulk of mankind to stop them, they wouldn't rise from the ashes. The best case scenario would be one of their gods returning somehow, probably Isha, but I don't know how this would happen, and even without that, they'd at least get some more breathing room. I'm pretty sure I'm out of crackpot reasons for why this would be a good thing, but if you have any, please let me know. Believe it or not, this isn't bait, but my unfiltered dogshit opinion, so maybe someone shares it. Either way, thanks for watching and getting me this far. YouTube is something that's entirely reliant on people giving the creator a chance. I can't say enough how happy and appreciative I am of everyone who's given me that chance. From these wonderful channel members donating their hard-earned money to everyone who just watches my shit, thank you all. Till next time, take care. And remember the rules, every time a 0 gets added to the sub counter, I make an abomination to try to get people to unsubscribe. Here's to 100k and making people regret getting me that far, and God rest your souls if by some miracle this niche hobby channel gets to 1 million.